The night I knocked on his door, I thought I was running from danger. I didn't realize I was stepping into it. The rain soaked through my jacket in seconds, cold and relentless, each drop stinging my skin as I stumbled up the last few steps, my hand trembling against the heavy wooden door, leaving faint streaks where I touched it, my breath coming in uneven pulls that sounded too loud in the quiet stretch of road behind me, like something, or someone, could still hear me, still follow, and I almost turned back, almost chose the storm over whatever waited inside, but my legs gave out before I could decide, and my fist hit the door harder than I meant it to, the sound echoing into the night like a mistake I couldn't take back, and for a second, nothing happened, just the wind, just the rain, just my heartbeat pounding so hard it blurred everything else, until the lock clicked, slow and deliberate, and the door opened just enough for light to spill across the porch, warm and steady, cutting through the darkness like it didn't belong there. And then he stepped into it, tall, composed, dressed like. The storm outside had nothing to do with him, his eyes sharp and still as they landed on me, not surprised, not concerned, just aware, like he had already decided something the moment he saw me. And I tried to speak, but the words caught somewhere between fear and exhaustion, so all I managed was a whisper that didn't even sound like mine. Please, and that was enough, because his expression didn't soften but his hand moved, quick and certain, pulling the door wider as he said something over his shoulder in a tone I didn't understand but felt immediately, commands, not questions. And then he stepped aside just enough for me to fall forward into a space that smelled like clean air and something expensive I couldn't name, and the door shut behind me with a finality that made my chest tighten, like I had just crossed a line I couldn't uncross, and I barely noticed the men who appeared from the edges of the room, dressed in dark suits, moving without hesitation, their presence quiet, but impossible to ignore, as if the house itself had eyes, and I flinched, instinctively pulling back, but his voice cut through it, low, steady. You're safe here. And I wanted to believe him. I really did. But nothing about this place felt normal, nothing about him felt safe in the way I understood safety. And when he stepped closer, just enough for me to see the way his gaze lingered on the marks I hadn't been able to hide, something shifted in his eyes, not pity, not shock, something colder, sharper, like he was connecting pieces I hadn't said out loud. And I realized with a jolt that he wasn't asking what happened because he already knew it mattered. And worse, he had already decided what to do about it. I did not remember walking further into the house. Only the sound of the door locking behind me, and the way the storm outside suddenly felt miles away, like it had been cut off on purpose, my shoes leaving faint wet marks across the polished floor as I stood there unsure of where to go, what to say, or whether I had just made the worst decision of my life. And the silence pressed in, heavy but controlled, broken only by the soft, measured steps of the man who had let me in, Adrian, though I did not know his name yet. Just the way his presence filled the space without effort, like everything here moved around him instead of the other way around. And when he spoke again, it was not louder, just clearer, sit. A single word, calm but impossible to ignore, and I found myself obeying before I even realized I had agreed, lowering onto the edge of a dark leather chair that felt too expensive for someone like me to touch, my hands gripping the fabric of my sleeve as if that could somehow steady the shaking I could not stop. And one of the men approached with a clean cloth and a small kit, placing it carefully on the table beside me without meeting my eyes, like this was routine, like I was not the first person to walk in like this. And that thought should have scared me more than it did, but all I felt was tired, so tired that even fear struggled to hold its shape. And then Adrian moved closer, not rushed, not hesitant, just deliberate, and when he knelt slightly in front of me, his focus shifted entirely to the cut along my arm. His fingers steady as he cleaned it with careful precision, no sudden movements, no unnecessary contact, just control, and I realized with a strange clarity that he was not doing this to comfort me. He was doing it because he had decided I was not going to walk out of here injured, and that difference mattered more than I expected. You are not from around here, he said after a moment, his tone neutral but observant, and I swallowed, forcing my voice to work. I just needed a place to wait out the storm. The lie sounded thin even to me, and his eyes lifted briefly to meet mine, not challenging, just knowing, like he was giving me the choice to keep it. And when he did not press further, Something inside my chest tightened unexpectedly, because silence from a man like him felt heavier than questions. And somewhere deep in the house, a phone vibrated once, sharp and controlled, and one of the men stepped forward to answer it, speaking in low tones I could not quite catch, but I saw. The shift immediately, the subtle change in posture, the way attention sharpened across the room, and Adrian noticed it too. Of course he did, his expression remaining unchanged as he finished wrapping my arm, securing the bandage with practiced ease before standing again, taller than I remembered, his gaze drifting past me toward the man on the phone, and when their eyes met, something unspoken passed between them, something that made my pulse spike all over again, because I did not know what world I had stepped into, but I knew this much. The storm outside was not the only thing that had followed me here, and when Adrian finally looked back at me, there was a new weight behind his calm, something quieter but far more dangerous, and he said, almost to himself but loud enough for me to hear, "It seems your storm did not stay outside." The air in the room changed before anyone said a word, like something unseen had crossed a line, and everyone felt it at the same time. And I watched the man on the phone lower his voice even further, his back straightening as if whatever he was hearing demanded more than attention. It demanded precision, and my fingers curled tighter against the edge of the chair as a familiar dread crept back in, slow and suffocating, the kind that does not come from imagination but from memory, from knowing exactly how things unfold when someone refuses to let go. And I shook my head before I even realized I was doing it, whispering, "No, he would not find me here." But the words sounded fragile, like they did not belong in a place built on certainty, and Adrian heard me. Of course he did, his gaze returning to me with that same steady weight, not rushed, not alarmed, just calculating in a way that made my chest tighten for a different reason now, because he was not reacting, he was assessing, and that meant whatever was coming did not surprise him. "Who is he?" he asked, not harsh, not gentle, just direct, and I hesitated, the answer sitting heavy in my throat, because saying it out loud would make it real in a way I had been trying to avoid for months. And for a second I thought about lying again, about pretending this was just bad timing, bad luck, anything. But the truth. But his eyes held mine without pressure, without demand, just waiting, and somehow that made it harder to hide. "Someone who does not understand the word no," I said finally, my voice quieter than I intended, and something flickered in his expression, not surprise, not anger, something colder, more controlled, like a door closing quietly instead of slamming shut, and behind him, the man ended the call and stepped forward, speaking just loud enough for the room to hear. "A vehicle has been circling the road for the last 10 minutes. The words settled into the space like a fact no one needed to question, and my breath caught as the pieces clicked into place, the timing, the distance, the way I had felt watched even before I reached the door, and I pushed myself up from the chair without thinking, panic rising sharp and fast. "I need to leave," I said, the instinct immediate and overwhelming. Because if he found me here, if he caused trouble in this place, then whatever protection I thought I had just found would disappear, and I could not risk dragging someone else into it. But I barely made it a step before Adrian's voice stopped me, not raised, not urgent, just absolute. "No." And I froze, not because he moved, not because anyone blocked my path, but because of the certainty in that single word, the kind that does not allow for argument, only acknowledgement. And when I turned back, he was already watching me, that same calm intensity. But now there was something else beneath it, something that felt like a line being drawn, not around him, but around me. "You walked in here asking for shelter," he continued, his tone even, measured. "You have it." And I shook my head, the fear clawing back. Stronger now. "You do not understand. He will not stop." And for the first time, there was the slightest shift in his posture, not tension, not hesitation, just a subtle straightening, like he had heard something important, something that confirmed what he already suspected. And when he spoke again, it was quieter, but heavier. "Neither do I." And the room fell still, not because of what he said, but because of what it meant. Because in that moment, I realized I had not just stepped into a place of power, I had stepped into a place that did not recognize fear the same way I did. And somewhere beyond the walls, the storm continued to rage. But inside, Something else had already taken control. The silence after his words did not feel empty. It felt decided, like something had already been set in motion and no one in the room needed to question it. And I stood there caught between the instinct to run and the strange, steady pull of staying. My heart still racing, but no longer from the same fear. Because Adrian did not look concerned, he looked certain. And that certainty wrapped around the situation in a way I did not understand, but could not ignore. And the man who had taken the call stepped closer, speaking again in that same controlled tone. The vehicle has slowed near the main gate, and I felt my breath hitch, my body reacting before my mind could catch up, the image forming too easily, headlights cutting through the rain, someone watching, waiting, and I shook my head again, more urgently this time. He does not give up. He waits until you think you are safe, and then I stopped myself, the rest of the sentence catching in my chest, but I did not need to finish it. Because Adrian's gaze sharpened, just slightly, enough for me to see that he understood more than I had said, and that realization sent a different kind of chill through me, not fear of him, but fear of what he might do with that understanding. You think leaving will solve that, he said, not as a question, more like an observation, and I swallowed hard, forcing myself to meet his eyes. If I am not here, he has no reason to stay. It sounded logical when I said it, simple, clean, but even as the words left my mouth, I knew. They were built on hope, not reality, and Adrian tilted his head just slightly, studying me in a way that made me feel transparent, like every weak point in my reasoning had already been mapped out. Or, he replied slowly, he learns that you run, and he follows. And the truth in that landed heavier than anything else that had been said so far, because I had spent months doing exactly that, moving, hiding, adjusting my life around the possibility of being found, and it had never actually stopped anything, only delayed it. And the room seemed to close in around that realization, the polished floors, the quiet men, the controlled atmosphere, all of it suddenly feeling less like a trap and more like a boundary, a line that something outside had not crossed yet. And Adrian turned slightly, his attention shifting to the man beside him. Keep the gates closed, he said calmly. No one comes in without my word. The instruction was simple, but the weight behind it was not, and I watched as it was accepted immediately, no hesitation, no discussion, just action. And for the first time since I had stepped inside, I understood that this was not just a house, it was a system, one that operated on rules I did not know but could feel working around me. And when Adrian looked back at me, there was something final in his expression, something that felt like a decision I had not been part of but was now bound to. You are not leaving tonight, he said, his voice low but absolute. And I opened my mouth to argue, to push back, to insist that this was not his decision to make, but the words did not come, because somewhere deep down, beneath the fear and the exhaustion and the instinct to keep running, there was a quiet, unfamiliar thought forming, one I did not want to acknowledge yet. And it was this: for the first time in a long time, someone was not asking me what I wanted to do. They were telling the world what would happen next, and somehow, the world was listening. The moment he said I was not leaving, something inside me resisted, not loudly, not enough to argue, but enough to remind me who I had been before all of this, someone who made her own decisions, someone who did not stay where she was told. And I shifted slightly, my fingers tightening at my sides as I forced myself to speak. You cannot just decide that for me. My voice was steadier than I expected, but it still carried the edge of uncertainty I could not fully hide. And for a brief second, I thought he might react, might push back or dismiss it entirely. But Adrian did neither. He simply looked at me, really looked, like he was measuring something beyond the words themselves. And when he answered, it was calm, almost quiet. I already did. Not arrogant, not forceful, just certain in a way that made arguing feel ineffective. And I hated that. Hated how easily that certainty slipped past my defenses, because it felt too close to something I had spent months escaping: control, decisions made without me. But there was a difference here, subtle but impossible to ignore. He was not taking something from me. He was placing something around me, a boundary, a shield, and I did not know what to do with that. You do not even know me, I said, trying again, needing to find something solid to hold on to, something that would remind me this was temporary, that I could still walk away. and his expression did not change. But there was a faint shift in his gaze, like he had been expecting that. "I know enough," he replied, and I let out a breath I had not realized I was holding, frustration mixing with the exhaustion already pulling at my body, because he was not giving me anything to push against. No raised voice, no threats, just calm control, and it made everything feel more real, more grounded, and somehow harder to fight. And across the room, one of the men moved toward a large window, adjusting something just out of sight, and I caught a glimpse of the outside world through the glass. Rain still pouring, headlights faint in the distance beyond the gate, barely visible, but enough to make my stomach drop, because he was still there, still waiting, and the realization hit harder now, not because of fear, but because of contrast. Outside was uncertainty, waiting, the constant pressure of being found, and inside was structure, control, a system that had already responded before I even asked for help. And Adrian followed my line of sight, his voice cutting through my thoughts. "He is not coming in." And it was not reassurance, not comfort, it was a statement, and something in me reacted to that. A small, fragile piece of trust one did not remember agreeing to. "How can you be so sure?" I asked, softer now, not challenging, just trying to understand, and for the first time, there was the faintest hint of something else in his expression, not emotion, not warmth, but something close to it, something human beneath the control. "Because this is my house," he said simply, and the way he said it carried more weight than the words themselves. It was not about walls or gates or security. It was about authority, about a world that operated differently from mine, one where certainty was not hoped for. It was enforced, and I felt my shoulders lower just slightly, the tension easing in a way I did not trust yet, but could not stop, and Adrian stepped back. Just enough to give me space, his attention shifting again to the room, to the quiet movement of the men around us. But before he turned away completely, his voice came once more, lower now, almost like a promise I had not asked for. "You are safe tonight." And I closed my eyes for a brief second, letting that settle, not fully believing it, not yet, but wanting to, more than I was ready to admit. Time moved strangely after that, not fast, not slow, just controlled, like everything inside the house followed a rhythm I could not see but could feel, and I stayed where I was for a moment longer, letting the weight of his words settle into something real, something I could hold on to, even if I was not ready to trust it completely. And when I finally opened my eyes, the room had shifted slightly, not in structure but in energy, the men no longer just watching but moving with quiet purpose, one checking a tablet, another speaking softly into an earpiece, all of it coordinated without noise, without chaos. And I realized this was not a reaction. This was routine, like whatever situation I had brought to the door had already been absorbed into a system designed to handle it. And that thought should have unsettled me more than it did, but instead it made something inside my chest loosen, just a fraction, because for the first time in a long time, I was not the one trying to figure everything out alone. "You should sit back down." Adrian's voice came from somewhere behind me, not commanding this time, just steady, and I turned slightly to see him near a long table, speaking quietly with one of the men before his attention returned to me. And I hesitated for only a second before doing as he said, not because I felt forced, but because the exhaustion I had been holding back finally started to catch up with me, settling into my bones in a way that made standing feel unnecessary. And as I sat, I became more aware of the small details around me, the soft lighting, the faint scent of something clean and subtle, the way nothing here felt accidental, everything placed, everything intentional. And it contrasted so sharply with the chaos I had just come from that it almost felt unreal. "Water," someone said, quietly, placing a glass within reach, and I looked at it for a moment before taking it, my hand still not entirely steady as I brought it to my lips, the coolness grounding in a way I had not expected. And across the room, Adrian watched, not closely, not intensely, just enough to know I was there. And that awareness lingered, not heavy, not invasive, just present, and I found myself speaking before I had decided to. "He will not leave." The words came out softer now, less panicked, more certain, because I knew how this worked. Patience, persistence, waiting until the moment felt right, and Adrian did not interrupt, did not dismiss it. He simply listened, which somehow made it easier to continue. He waits until people stop paying attention. I added, my gaze dropping to the glass in my hands, tracing the condensation along the side, until it feels normal again. And for a moment, the room was quiet, not tense, not uncertain, just still. And then Adrian stepped closer again, not too close, just enough to shift the space between us. Then it is a good thing nothing here is normal, he said. And I looked up at him, really looked this time, at the way he stood, at the calm in his posture, at the quiet authority that did not need to be proven, and something in me understood, not fully, not yet, but enough to recognize that whatever rules I had been living by no longer applied in this place. And as if to confirm that, one of the men approached again, speaking in a low voice. The vehicle has stopped at the end of the road. And my breath caught instinctively, but Adrian did not even turn, his focus remaining exactly where it had been. Let it, he replied. And there was no hesitation, no concern, just quiet finality. And in that moment, I realized something that shifted everything just slightly. I had spent so long fearing what was behind me that I had never considered what it would feel like to stand somewhere it could not reach. And as the storm continued outside, louder now against the windows, I sat there in a place that did not bend to it. And for the first time that night, I was not thinking about running. I was waiting to see what would happen next. The longer I sat there, the more the silence began to change shape. No longer something heavy pressing down on me, but something deliberate, like the quiet itself was part of the protection, and I found myself listening differently, not for footsteps behind me or the sound of a car pulling too close, but for the subtle movements inside the house, the low voices, the steady rhythm of people who were not reacting to danger but managing it, and it was unfamiliar in a way that made my thoughts slow down, just enough for something else to surface, something I had been avoiding, the realization that I was not the only one being observed anymore, because Adrian had not taken his eyes off the situation, not once, even when he looked away, even when he spoke to someone else. His awareness stayed anchored, and that kind of attention was not something I had ever experienced before, not like this, not without expectation or pressure attached to it, and it made me uneasy in a completely different way, because I did not know what it meant to be protected without being controlled, and I was still trying to understand the difference when a faint sound broke through the quiet, not loud, not sudden, just present, a soft vibration from somewhere deeper in the house, followed by the almost imperceptible shift of the men around us, their posture tightening by a fraction, their focus sharpening without a single word spoken, and I felt it immediately, that instinct I could not turn off, the one that told me something had changed, and my fingers tightened around the glass again, my breath catching before I could stop it, and Adrian noticed, of course he did, his gaze flicking to me for half a second before returning to the room, and that was enough to remind me that I was not invisible here, that whatever was unfolding was being measured with me inside it, not outside. And one of the men stepped forward, speaking in that same controlled tone. There is movement beyond the gate. And my heart dropped, not into panic this time, but into something colder, more focused, because this was the moment I had been running from, the one that always came eventually, the moment where distance no longer mattered, where hiding stopped working, and I swallowed hard, forcing myself not to look at the door, not to imagine the space beyond it, because I already knew what I would see: headlights, stillness, patience, and I had seen it too many times before. But Adrian did not move toward the door, did not raise his voice, did not even seem surprised. He simply stood there, listening, and then he gave a small nod, almost unnoticeable if you were not looking for it. Keep him there, he said, calm, measured, like he was adjusting something minor, instead of responding to a threat, and the words settled into the room with that same quiet authority I was starting to recognize, not forceful, not dramatic, just final, and the men moved again, efficient, silent, like the decision had already been expected, and I felt something shift inside me, not fear, not exactly, but a release of something I had been holding on to for too long, because for the first time, the situation was not escalating, it was being contained, and I did not have to anticipate every possible outcome. I did not have to plan my next move, and that realization was almost overwhelming, because it left space for something else, something I had not allowed myself to feel in a long time. uncertainty that was not tied to danger. And I looked at Adrian again, really looked at the way he stood between me and everything outside without making it obvious, without making it a display, just there, steady, unmoving. And I heard myself ask, quieter than before, what happens now? And he turned his head just slightly, his gaze meeting mine with that same calm intensity. And for a moment, the rest of the room seemed to fade into the background, like the answer only existed between the two of us. Now, he said, his voice low, certain, you stop running. And something about the way he said it made my chest tighten, not from fear, but from the weight of a possibility I had not dared to consider until now, the possibility that maybe, just maybe, he was right. His words did not echo, they settled, deep and quiet, like something that had been waiting for me to hear it at the exact right moment, and I felt it in my chest before I could even respond. That unfamiliar pause where instinct did not immediately tell me to run, did not push me toward the nearest exit or the next plan, and for a second, I did not move, did not speak, just stood there in the space between what I had always done and what he was asking me to do now, and it felt fragile, like one wrong thought would break it. And I almost let it, almost fell back into the pattern I knew, the one that had kept me moving for months. But something held me there, something steady and unyielding that did not belong to me, and I realized it was him, not physically, not forcefully, but in the way he stood, the way he did not rush me, did not repeat himself, just waited with that same calm certainty that made everything else feel unnecessary, and the house seemed to respond to it. 2. The quiet movement continuing around us, controlled, precise, like whatever was happening beyond the gate was already accounted for, already contained within a system I could not see but was starting to trust, even if I did not understand it yet. And I exhaled slowly, the tension leaving my shoulders in a way that felt almost foreign. Because I had been carrying it for so long, I had forgotten what it felt like without it. And when I spoke again, my voice was different, softer, not because I was afraid, but because I was no longer fighting the same way. And if he does not stop, I asked, the question no longer about escape, but about what came next, and Adrian did not hesitate, did not look away. Then he learns, he said simply. And something in the way he said it made my pulse shift, not spike, not race, just steady, because there was no doubt in it, no room for uncertainty, just a quiet promise that whatever lesson needed to be learned would be handled. And I swallowed, the weight of that settling into something real, something I could feel rather than question. And behind us, one of the men approached again, his voice low but clear. He is still waiting. And I felt the old fear try to rise, that instinctive reaction to being watched, to knowing someone out there was not giving up, but it did not take hold the same way this time. It flickered, then steadied, because I was not standing alone in it anymore. And Adrian finally turned his head slightly, just enough, to acknowledge the update. Good, he replied, calm as ever. And that single word shifted everything, because it reframed the situation entirely. It was no longer about avoiding him. It was about allowing him to stay exactly where he was, outside, waiting, unable to cross into a space he did not control, and that realization settled deeper than anything else had so far, because it meant the power dynamic had changed, not through force or confrontation, but through something quieter, something more absolute. And I found myself looking toward the window again, not with dread this time, but with a strange, cautious curiosity, wondering what it looked like from his side now, to stand out there in the rain, expecting the same outcome as before, unaware that this time the rules were different. And when I turned back, Adrian was already watching me, that same unreadable expression, but there was something else beneath it now, something I could not quite name but could feel, like he was waiting for me to understand something on my own. And slowly, without realizing it, I nodded, not to him, not exactly, but to the shift that had already happened, the one I could no longer deny. And in that quiet moment, with the storm still raging outside and the house standing untouched by it, I understood something that changed everything. I had not just found shelter that night. I had stepped into a place where running was no longer the only option. The shift inside me did not happen all at once. It was quieter than that, slower, like something settling into place after being out of alignment for too long. And I stood there in the middle of a room that did not belong to me, in a life I did not understand. Yet for the first time in months, I did not feel like I was about to lose control of it, and that realization was as unsettling as it was steadying, because I had built everything around movement, around staying one step ahead, around never letting the silence last long enough for anything to catch up, and now the silence was here again. But it felt different. It felt chosen, and I realized that was the difference. I had not been forced into stillness. I had been given a place where stillness could exist without consequence, and my eyes drifted once more toward the window, the rain still falling hard against the glass, blurring the outside world into something distant and unclear, and somewhere beyond it, I knew he was still there, waiting, expecting the same ending he had always gotten, and for the first time, I wondered what it would look like when that expectation broke, not through confrontation, not through chaos, but through something he could not predict, something he could not control, and I turned back slowly, my gaze finding Adrian again, and there was a question in my mind, not about leaving, not about running, but about understanding, about what came after this moment, about what it meant to stand in a place like this and not be the one reacting anymore, and I did not need to ask it out loud, because somehow he seemed to read it anyway, his expression unchanged but his presence shifting just slightly, like he was allowing space for that question to exist. He will keep trying, I said quietly, not as a warning, not as fear, just as truth, and Adrian inclined his head just a fraction, acknowledging it without resistance. Then he will keep failing, he replied, just as simply, and the certainty in his voice did not feel like arrogance, it felt like structure, like a system that had already accounted for outcomes I had spent too long trying to calculate on my own, and I felt something in my chest loosen further, something I had not realized was still holding on, and I took a slow breath, letting it out carefully, like I was testing whether the moment would hold, whether the ground beneath me would stay steady if I allowed myself to stand still on it. And it did, it held, stronger than I expected, and I realized then that the night had already changed something fundamental, not just in my circumstances, but in me, because I was no longer looking for an exit, I was looking for understanding, and that was new, unfamiliar, but not unwelcome, and behind us, the quiet movements of the house continued, controlled, precise, the storm outside still raging without effect, and Adrian remained exactly where he had been, between me and everything beyond those walls, not as a barrier, not as a cage, but as something else entirely, something I had not had a word for until now. And as I stood there, no longer trembling, no longer scanning for the next escape, I understood it, slowly but clearly, and the thought settled into place with a quiet certainty that matched his own. I had not just been given shelter that night, I had been given a choice, and for the first time in a long time, I was not choosing to run.